Members, I am taking the chair as acting Speaker today. Before we proceed with our scheduled business, I need to clarify a matter in relation to simultaneous translation. On the 15th of June 2021, the Assembly directed the Commission to provide a simultaneous translation facility to enable members who wish to do so to participate in Assembly or committee business using Irish or Ulster Scots. I wish to remind you of the Speaker's recent correspondence to all members in relation to this matter. The Assembly Commission has undertaken an exercise to assess demand for this service amongst members in this current mandate. It found that while 10 members intend to make substantive contributions in Irish, no current member of this Assembly intends to contribute to business in Ulster Scots. On that basis, the Assembly Commission has decided only to provide simultaneous translation services in Irish at this time. Should circumstances change and the Speaker receive advance notification by any member who wishes to contribute to Assembly business in Ulster Scots, arrangements will be set in place to facilitate this, subject to the availability of interpreters. Let us move on. Having been given notice by no less than 30 members under Standing Order 11, the Speaker has summoned the Assembly to meet today for the purpose of conducting the item of business that appears on the order paper. The first item of business is the election of the Speaker and Deputy Speakers. Section 39(1) of the Northern Ireland Act provides that each Assembly shall, at its first business, elect from amongst its members a presiding officer and deputies. Therefore, the Assembly cannot conduct any further business until a Speaker and at least 2 Deputy Speakers have been elected. Members should be clear. Without the election of a Speaker and 2 Deputies, no further business can proceed. I wish to advise members that the election of a Speaker will be conducted under the procedure set out in Standing Order 4, further Standing Order 4.2, and I am the acting Speaker today for the purposes of electing a Speaker. I will begin by asking for nominations. Any member may rise to propose that another member is elected as Speaker. I will then ask for the proposal to be seconded by another member, as required by Standing Order 14. I will then verify that the member seconded is willing to accept the nomination. I will then ask for further proposals, and following the same procedure for each. When it appears there are no further proposals, I will make it clear that the time for proposals has passed. If members indicate that they wish to speak, a debate relevant to the election may then take place, during which members will have up to 5 minutes to speak. At the conclusion of the debate, or the conclusion of the nominations, if there are no requests to speak, I shall put the question that the member first proposed shall be Speaker of this Assembly. The vote will be on a cross-community basis. If the proposal is not carried, I shall put the question in relation to the next nominee, and so on until all nominations are exhausted. Once a Speaker is elected, and all other nominations will fall automatically. Members, do I have a proposal for the office of Speaker of the Assembly? Mr. O'Toole.
I nominate Patsy McGlone to be Speaker of the Assembly.
Is there a member to second that motion? Okay. Are there any other nominations?
I'd like to propose Mike Nesbitt as Speaker.
And is there a seconder for that proposal? Thank you. Are there any other nominations? Can I then ask Mr. McGlone if he is willing to serve as Speaker?
Glacam Einmanachan, Achoncolia, Agus Moichas Limakaran Shaw as Ochiniano. I accept.
Mr. Nesbitt.
I am willing to serve.
Thank you. The time for proposals has now expired. A number of members have indicated that they wish to speak. I would remind members that they may speak only once in the course of the debate. Members will have up to 5 minutes in which to speak. I now call Michelle O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr Acting Speaker. Today, this Assembly is meeting in a last-ditch attempt to form a government and to get things up and moving. People will be watching bewildered as they go to their work, and they want to see their politicians do the same. Most of us are here because we want to do the job that we were elected to do. Today, our caretaker ministers rally to take decisions within tight limits before their civil servants are left in an impossible position come midnight, where they are expected to run our essential public services and yet have no budget and no powers to do so. Jeffrey Donaldson and the DUP are in a perpetual standoff with the public, the majority of whom they do not speak for or indeed represent. He stood for election, yet failed to show up. This is his mess and a failure of leadership by him and his party. Jeffrey Donaldson and the DUP have left us all at the mercy of the heartless and dysfunctional Tory government, whose own survival is all that ever counts. The Tories care less for the consequences of their dire policy decisions and their political choices on the lives of workers and families here. Jeffrey Donaldson points the finger at everyone else for the DUP's own indefensible and enduring failures. The facts are that back in May, people voted for change. They voted because they want politics to work. The electorate want grown-up politicians to take everyday challenges seriously, the things that impact on the lives of workers and families. Jeffrey Donaldson and the DUP do not take these matters seriously. At a time when so many workers and families and businesses are suffering from the incredible pressures of the cost of living crisis, at a time when our health service is broken and needs fixed, at a time when waiting lists need to be tackled, people need to know that we have their backs. The Secretary of State met with the parties yesterday, restating his position that 1 minute past midnight tonight, should no First Minister and no Deputy First Minister be appointed, that he will call another election. And here we are here in this chamber today, and in this hour we could appoint a Speaker, a First Minister, a Deputy First Minister, appoint a new executive who could meet immediately to take decisions to put money into people's pockets today. But the DUP are continuing to deny and disrespect the outcome of the May election. The DUP want yesterday. That's no longer available to you. But what the people here want is the change that they voted for back in that May election. Yesterday evening, the new British Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, met with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. They stressed the importance that they both place on relationships between London and Brussels and on working together as friends and allies as they confront the global challenges and the uncertainties of war in Europe and the energy crisis. But they also stated that their shared preference for joint solutions and a negotiated solution to the current protocol issues which will provide the stability and predictability that society and businesses here need after the disruption and the upheaval of Brexit. Now, most parties in this chamber, whilst opposed to Brexit, do support the protocol and also want it to work better. So the negotiating parties have our fulsome support to land a deal. But for the avoidance of doubt, let's also be clear. This Assembly and this Executive has no mandate or no role in these negotiations. So to hold back power sharing and to hold down the public in the meantime is futile, it's reckless, it's short-sighted and it's also senseless. So the public will give their verdict on all of that in the matter of the next number of weeks. And if the DUP continue to block power sharing, let's also be clear that direct rule, as we've known it in the past, is not an option. The alternative to power sharing is joint authority from London and Dublin.
Mr Paul Givan.
The recall of this Assembly is another flawed and failed attempt at trying to form a new executive, and each time Unionist members in this House and our mandate is disrespected. Power sharing, if it is to mean anything, has to be about consensus and consent, not contempt, which is what we on these benches have been subjected to on every occasion that the recall of this Assembly has taken place over the past 6 months. And it has no credibility coming from the parties that demanded a border within the United Kingdom down the Irish Sea. It has no credibility from Sinn Féin, who refused to take their seats at Westminster, who boycotted this assembly for 3 years, and the First Minister for all, self-proclaimed, walked out of the health service for 3 years, kept these institutions down. The Alliance Party, who demand majority rule, to exclude the DUP. Not once did they seek the recall of this Assembly in 3 years and join with Unionists when Sinn Féin blocked it. Not once did the Alliance Party seek to exclude Sinn Féin in order to reform these institutions, but now they want to exclude unionism. And the SDLP, who now call for joint authority, along with Sinn Féin and the Alliance Party, seek to threaten unionism.
Mr. Given, point of order. Ms. Armstrong.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker. I just would wonder if you could clarify for me today, as a point of order, if today's vote on Speaker is cross-community, and in that vote, if those of us who are designated as others will carry the same weight of vote as everyone else.
Today's vote is a cross-community vote, as set out in the Constitution of this Assembly.
The cross-community party that no longer wants this place to operate in a cross-community fashion. It's rich coming from the Alliance Party. Well, progress will not be made. It will not be made by trying to isolate, denigrate and intimidate the Democratic Unionist Party. The DUP does support devolution. We're ready to appoint ministers today, and we respect the mandates of all parties and the positions that they would be entitled to based upon the last election. But the barrier to devolution is not the DUP, it's the Northern Ireland Protocol. And when this is addressed, we are ready to form a new executive, both now, and that will be our position after the election, irrespective of the outcome. So what the Secretary of State now needs to do is to get on with his job so that we can do our job. It was the United Kingdom government in New Decade, New Approach 2 years ago made a commitment that Northern Ireland's place within the UK internal market would be fully restored and respected. They have failed to do it, compounding the failure of that government and this Secretary of State, who voted for the legislation that's created the mess of the protocol. It's a protocol that, let me remind members, at a time of cost of living, is costing hundreds of millions of pounds of taxpayers' money through the Trader Support Scheme. £6 million per month. That's £32 million at checks at the ports already. It's increased costs to businesses, consumers. It threatens our medicine supply chain, both for humans and indeed for animals. It's driving up the cost of infrastructure with a tariff on steel. It excludes Northern Ireland from benefiting from any VAT reduction that may come into place in Great Britain. So this, in a cost of living crisis, the protocol is the single biggest driver of that within a Northern Ireland context. And so as people face a cost of living crisis, the Secretary of State is set to call an election so that he can save face. To do so by the Secretary of State will be an admission of failure on his part and the part of the UK government, because it is they who have promised the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill, who are negotiating with the European Union, and to this day there has been abject failure on the part of the UK government. So it will be the Secretary of State that will own the decision to call this election. But unlike the Conservative Party, we're not afraid of an election if it is called. We're ready to seek a renewed mandate to get the fair deal and a restoration of devolution on the basis of both Unionists and Nationalists supporting it. That is the solid foundation upon which this Assembly needs to be created. I'll give way.
I thank the member for giving way, and he's absolutely right to highlight, in a cost of living crisis, the huge costs associated with the Northern Ireland Protocol to date. But would he agree with me that that's a semi-skimmed version of a protocol which is only a date operating at 10%? If we get the full fat version supported by the Alliance, the Sinn Féin and indeed the SDLP, what would the cost be there? Our logistics sectors would hold to a halt within 48 hours. It's ludicrous.
The member has an extra minute, but can I remind members that interventions are to be short and not speeches in themselves? Point of order.
Mr. Acting Speaker, the member has just referred to only Unionists and Nationalists in this House. Could you actually clarify if there are those of us who are forced to be designated as others also in attendance?
The answer in respect of this is that my role today is to oversee the election of a Speaker and Deputy Speakers. We are here under the Constitution of the Northern Ireland Assembly, which sets out that role. Any other questions can be referred to the Speaker.
I'm glad the member for Strangford recognises there are unionists in this chamber. Mr Buckley is absolutely right. What you have now is a very limited form of the protocol being implemented, although the parties opposite all want the rigorous implementation to completely hamstring the people of Northern Ireland. The unionist population will have an opportunity in this election to send a clear message to the European Union. Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom, and we will have our place within that union fully respected. And to unionist voters I say this: divided unionism cannot win elections. Now is the time to come together. The Democratic Unionist Party is being tested. We will remain strong and resolute. So too will the unionist people of Northern Ireland.
Call Naomi Long.
Thank you, Mr Acting Speaker. I intend to keep my remarks on this short. I think, given what we've heard already, there is really little to be said in this debate. We will no doubt, throughout the course of it, rehearse the impact on our public services, the impact on our public finances, the impact on individuals' lives in terms of the cost of living crisis, and the impact on these institutions and public confidence in them as a result of a failure to elect a Speaker here today. To be clear, Mr Acting Speaker, this vote today, which will take place at the end of this debate, is not a vote on who will sit in the chair you currently occupy. No one outside this chamber, and few of us in this chamber, actually care one way or the other who that will be. We care only that someone will occupy that chair in order that we can do business, the jobs that we were elected to do, and serve the public to the fullest of our ability. The question that we will vote on, therefore, at the end of this debate is not whether we know the people of Northern Ireland are suffering. We all know they are as a result of no institutions here. It's not whether we know that our public finances are in a parlous state. We all know that already, and it has been rehearsed many times. It is not about whether we know our public services are on their knees. We all know they are on their knees, and those that are not already on their knees are teetering on the brink. It is not whether we know that all paths lead back to the Assembly, to quote Paul Given in previous conversation. It is whether we care about those issues, whether we care enough to prioritise those issues over party political interest. I think the previous speaker gave us an insight into what their answer is going to be. As in every other sitting, I'm clear what our answer is. The people of Northern Ireland and their needs and their interests come first. And what is in their interests is a functioning Assembly, a functioning executive, sustainable institutions and power sharing. And let's talk about power sharing. Let's talk about respect for mandate. It is ironic that a member would get up and hold forth on those issues, whilst entirely disregarding those of us who sit in this chamber with a mandate to be other than unionist or nationalist, entirely disregard our right to define ourselves, and instead, through heckles from the back benches and the one-seat wonder behind me, we are told what we are through the lens of what is nothing more than prejudice, rather than people out there who recognise what we stand for and our values, and who put confidence in us in May. I will take no lectures from the DUP when it comes to issues of respect. I will take no issues when it comes, no lectures from the DUP either, when it comes to issues of reform and the unpicking of these institutions. For the DUP are hoisting a petard of their own making in St Andrews. Had they not changed the rules then as a demand to come back into government, because there's always a demand before you can come into government, they would be First Minister right now. Think on that. Think on that. Mr Speaker, neither will I take advice on the DUP as to whether or not we should have reform. I simply caution members before they hold forth on the issues of majoritarianism to look at the history of their party, to look at their 2011 manifesto, where they would quite happily have had a voluntary coalition, their 2016 manifesto, where they would have had a coalition, a voluntary coalition, and where nobody else's mandate would have been respected. Our modest reforms respect not only the DUP's mandate, but the I will.
Does the member agree that the only way forward for this place is about reform, to ensure that all mandates can be respected, and those who don't want to turn up to work and get the job done can opt out and sit on the back benches?
Absolutely, absolutely agree. To be clear, the DUP have argued for reform. What we are arguing for is a reform that respects their mandate to be in government and gives them the right that we have, that the Ulster Unionists have and that the SDLP have, that we confer those rights on the main parties in this chamber also to walk away where they wish to do so, but confer the right on the public to have an executive of their choosing. I will not take lectures either, in closing, Mr Speaker, when it comes to the cost of living crisis. Let me just remind the DUP, Sammy Wilson is probably the only human being alive still championing the Liz Truss mini-fiscal event. Reflect on that when you try to pay your mortgages. That's what I would advise people.
Doug Beattie.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. There's an awful lot of anger in here today, and I can understand that, but I have to say the anger that was being shown in this floor today is absolutely nothing compared to the anger that is out on the streets and the towns and the villages of Northern Ireland. And I guess we're all going to feel a little bit of that anger in the next 6 or 7 weeks. Hey, it's going to be fun. But I'd like to start with a little bit of good news if I can, and I would just like a big shout out to the campaign to save the Craigavon lakes and parks. They've worked 6 years and finally got it overturned so that their park in central Craigavon will now no longer be destroyed. And I just want to shout out to them, well done. And the next one we have to deal with is Knock-I-Vey, and we all know I've championed Knock-I-Vey. I also want to take a moment as well, please, to just thank Robin Swan as our Health Minister for all he has done in the last 2 years. It's been exceptional, with exceptionally difficult times in the middle of COVID, and I thought he has been fantastic, and I think it's only right at first. Right? Yeah, of course.
Will the member accept that Robin Swan has refused to repeatedly answer questions on abortion services in Northern Ireland and will refuse to answer what legal advice he had on implementation, so the Northern Ireland office had to step in?
Point of order.
Mr Speaker, it says in my order paper, item 1 is election of Speaker and Deputy Speaker. The debates, are these referring to this?
Mr Brady, can I ask you to come back to the tenor, the central tenet of this debate?
Absolutely, Speaker. Sure, I've said it now, so it hardly matters. But look, here's an interesting thing. The moment the new Prime Minister became the Prime Minister, the first thing he did was to call the Welsh Government and the Scottish Government leaders and to pass on his vision for the United Kingdom. He's not rang the Northern Ireland First or Deputy First Minister because we don't have one. And he spoke about the Intergovernmental Relations Forum, which is the 4 nations coming together to talk about the issues which affect all corners of this United Kingdom that we're part of. And we're not going to be part of that because we don't have a government running at this moment in time. We are being put on the windowsill of the United Kingdom. And that concerns me as a whole UK unionist and as an Ulster unionist. And of course this is because of the protocol, and the protocol is absolutely an issue. And we have changed on that issue from rigorous implementation to people saying, look, actually there are fundamental problems here. Well, not Johnny, fundamental problems here, and we have to deal with those fundamental problems. There are, and we do, and we can't ignore it. And we have been arguing this case since 2019 that we need to fix these problems. But to fix these problems shouldn't be done at the detriment of having stable government. They can be done at the same time. They are being done at the same time. They're being done as we speak now. Things have moved. Conversations have changed. But it's our people who are suffering. And as we get into this place where we have nothing and we don't have even the basis or even the foundations of any form of government here in Northern Ireland, because the last vestiges of it from this place goes at midnight tonight, I am really concerned that people are now going out of their way to try and unpick the Belfast Agreement. And the language that is being used, I have to say, is not helping. Joint authority. Nobody's defining what that is. It's just not helpful. It's not going to happen. We know it doesn't happen. The Belfast Agreement doesn't allow for it. But we're just using it because we have to poke each other in the eye. That's what we do all the time. I will always stand up and promote the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. I will always stand up to say that we need government up and running. I will always say, isn't it better to have the arguments in this place here and provide for the people out there? I'm happy with that. And I think most of the people here, regardless of where you sit in this place, wants to do exactly that. Provide for the people out there. We have to fix the issues around the protocol, and we can do that if we come together, and we can come together if we have an executive. We need to get back to work. We need to get back to work to support our economy. We need to get back to work to support people's jobs. We need to get back to work to deal with the nurses' pay claims, because I tell you, it's going to focus minds in the middle of December if our nurses are on a picket line and we're going out asking for votes. It's going to focus our minds, all of us. We need to get together to find a solution and get the government to start moving on the replacement for the European Social Fund, because people are going to lose out, because it's not there, and we're going to lose jobs. We need to get back to work to promote for all our people, people who are suffering as we speak. And I did say this before, that all they're getting out of here from leadership is silence, except for the argues and the rants they're going to get today. And of course I'm part of them, because I'm just as angry. We need to get back to work. We need to get back to work now. We need to find a mechanism to get back to work. The Secretary of State needs to listen. An election will not be good, but the parties coming together for talks of something to try and come up with some sort of a deal, some sort of a compromise needs to be put in place. That's what I want. I want to get back to work. I would be back in here today. I would be back in here tomorrow. The Ulster Unionist Party want to serve.
Matthew O'Toole.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker. And first of all, nominating Patsy McGloon, I want to welcome the passage of the Culture and Language Act at Westminster. Patsy would be a fine speaker, and is the most fluent Gaeilgeoir in this chamber. He would be the perfect person in this era. In July, Mr. Acting Speaker, we met to pay tribute to David Trimble, one of the key builders of these institutions. At that time, I said that many of us had lost the ability or the willingness to build things, and some of us simply wanted to tear things down. 3 months on, and sadly, that hasn't changed. But while this Assembly has sat mothballed and silent, people's homes have got colder, their trust in politics has fallen even further, and their lives have gotten harder. My party isn't responsible for that mess, but I'm ashamed by it. I'm ashamed of this place, because unlike others in this chamber, I'm capable of shame. In May, we asked people to vote for us in our parties on the basis of coming here to represent their interests and to try to make their lives better. Since then, the crisis in the cost of living has deepened and been intensified by the actions of the Conservative government in pursuing kamikaze economic policies designed to make rich people richer, but in fact making everyone poorer. Headline inflation is at a 40-year high. Budget food items have risen by 17%. Energy costs, as we all know, have multiplied. Gas and electricity bill payers here await reductions being applied to their bills. But people on prepayment meters don't know when they're going to get support. And for home heating oil users, which is most people in Northern Ireland, all they have is the vague and paltry promise of £100. All of this compounded by the fact that we have the lowest levels of disposable income in these islands, and our healthcare crisis deepens by the day, and our crisis in various public services deepens by the day. To say, as the party opposite has done, that devolved government can do little in these circumstances is as nihilistic as it is untrue. There may not be limitless resources to make everything better, but without ministers, things will unquestionably get worse. Budgets will not rise, nurses and doctors will not be recruited, plans will not be made, investment will be stalled. Since the previous collapse in 2017 is sometimes cited as a justification for this collapse, let me be clear, that was wrong too. It damaged our economy and it harmed public services. But two wrongs don't make a right. One area where it is true to say that this chamber does not have much influence is in relation to EU-UK relations and the protocol. But if we were sitting in an assembly and there was a functioning executive, it might at least be able to try to find common voice on what we want from our post-Brexit arrangements. People here are not just losing faith in politics and democracy, they're losing interest in it. What we are doing today is a farce, but it's also a tragedy. It is completely removed from the needs of real people who are suffering. And I say to the members opposite, your constituents are suffering too. Another election would be a farce, and it should not happen. An election, Mr. Acting Speaker, to what? It would simply serve to polarise and waste millions at a time when people are in need and public services are collapsing. It would stretch the elastic of public confidence, of public patience, beyond breaking point. Unionism used to say that it wanted nationalists to make Northern Ireland work. Mr. Acting Speaker, if only we were allowed, if only they would do the same. The DUP seems set on turning this place into an ungoverned and ungovernable mess. That is a tragedy for everyone who lives here. But it is a huge strategic error for unionism, because the result will not be safe direct rule from London, which would be untenable and unacceptable, not least from this wholly discredited Tory government. The result would be an inevitable increase in the number of people, including fairly moderate ones, who ask whether the real way to make Northern Ireland work is to seek a new north in a new Ireland inside Europe. I want this assembly to sit. I want to serve the people of South Belfast and all of Northern Ireland. The SDLP wants to be a constructive opposition to those who have been given the right to serve in government and ministerial office. But, Mr. Acting Speaker, if we are all forced to simply live amid the ruins of one party's destructive and self-destructive urges, our attention and others will inevitably turn to building something new and better for all the people of this place.
Jim Allister.
Mr. Acting Speaker, how dare unionists stand up for themselves? How dare unionists say that they cannot operate a system which requires them to operate a protocol that decrees that GB is a foreign country? How dare unionists not accept the partitioning of the United Kingdom? How dare unionists say that colony-like they won't accept foreign laws over which they have no control and no input? And how dare unionists ever think of using the only leverage they have to force change on these issues? That is the arrogant, belligerent message that's coming across in this House. Who do you unionists think you are, that you should dare to stand up for what you believe in? And of course it's coming loudest and clearest from those who themselves, not for 1 year, not for 2 years, but for 3 years, brought government to a halt in this province until they got, through using their leverage, what they needed. But how dare unionists think themselves that they should dare to defend the union? Because this protocol is dismantling this union. That is why, of course, its greatest cheerleaders are Sinn Féin and their little helpers in this House. Yes?
I thank the member for giving way, and I know there's many members in this House that don't want or aren't interested in the genuine economic concerns imposed by the protocol. But what about the independent experts who, at a House of Lords committee just last week, said that the supply chains of full implementation of the protocol would grind to a halt within 48 hours? What about the pharmaceutical companies that said they would have a huge problem in the supply of medicines to Northern Ireland? Are these not issues which affect all of our people?
They are, but sadly most in this House don't care. They don't care that our farming industry is facing a crisis because 51% of our veterinary medicines from come the 31st of December won't be available. They don't care at the rise in steel prices. They don't care about the 30% extra in travel costs. They care only about the precious protocol because they see it delivering their all-island economy, which they see as a stepping stone. I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to hear from you later. I do want to say gently to Mr Doug Beattie, who seems to put faith in certain talks. These talks cannot deliver a solution because these talks are circumscribed by the mandate that the EU has given them. And that mandate is only to tinker, it is only to make the protocol work better, whatever that means. There is no mandate which allows the sovereignty issue to be addressed in these talks. And this sovereignty issue is the fundamental issue about the protocol. It's about the fact that we are subject to foreign laws, that we are in a situation where the other part of our nation is decreed to be a foreign country and therefore we must check their goods. Those issues are incapable of being addressed in these talks because the parameters of these talks do not extend to that. So it is a delusion to think, if only we could have these talks. And of course it's equally a delusion to think, if only we could have Stormont. No cost of living crisis, no fuel hikes, no problems in our health service. Utter delusion. And the utter delusion is rooted in the fact that this Assembly and this Executive of the Whirlwind has no money of themselves. All of these issues depend entirely on the generosity of the Treasury. And money is coming without this Assembly on the energy crisis, just as money came on COVID. Where from? From the Treasury. So it is another delusion that feeds the ego of some in this House who think that if only we could get Stormont back. So those talks are not going to deliver. Let me say to the Secretary of State, you can call an election. Bring it on, Secretary of State. I'll be there to try and stiffen the resolve to make sure that unionism does not roll over. Voting for strength, not weakness. But let's be very, very clear, Secretary of State. Your first priority should not be about trying to bludgeon unionists into submission on the protocol. Your first priority, Secretary of State, should be about defending the sovereignty, recovering the sovereignty that was ill-gotten by the EU over the very place of which you are the Secretary of State. If you're the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, then you should be making sure, as a Conservative and Unionist, that the Union rules in Northern Ireland,
the member
not
draws
the EU.
The member draws remarks to a close, please.
Secretary of State, and you are failing miserably in that challenge. I finish with this. No surrender is not just an historic slogan. It's a present-day necessity in opposing this union dismantling protocol.
Jerry Carroll.
Wow. Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker. It was once famously written that history repeats itself, first as tragedy, then as farce. To that I would add, and then the DUP. because recent history has shown that no matter how much misery they inflict on our communities, no matter what the very real damage caused by their actions, they continue their song and dance about the protocol. And the reason that the DUP have continued this cycle is very simple. Their focus on the protocol is designed to divide people, to ramp up tensions and ultimately to shore up their own vote. They believe their grandstanding and political brinkmanship will distract from the fact that they have failed people on all sides during this cost of living crisis. But people aren't easily fooled. The party that initially backed the protocol is now telling people that the North shouldn't be treated differently from the rest of the UK. These same fundamentalists had no problem with the North being a special case when it came to the denial of abortion rights, equal marriage and minority language rights. Their hypocrisy is absolutely glaring. The same hypocrisy that saw a sitting DUP minister have the gall to accuse the Tories of creating instability here in the North, despite his own party's refusal to govern. Let's remember that it was the DUP who propped up the Tories for years, and they waged economic war on working-class people across all these islands, giving handouts to the wealthy and austerity to the rest. It was the DUP and other parties here that voted through the cruel welfare reforms that are now wreaking havoc in hard-hit households. It was the DUP, even last week, who voted with Liz Truss's government when her own party colleagues were fleeing the sinking ship. Indeed, Acting Speaker, the DUP and the Tories are two sides of the same grubby coin. When this Assembly last sat, the DUP assured us they could still govern. They could help tackle the cost of living crisis because ministers were in place. But the actions of those ministers have given little comfort to countless working-class people who are struggling to make ends meet. The sitting of a DUP Education Minister did not protect substitute teachers who found they hadn't been paid their wages this month and who could still be waiting for money as we approach Christmas. There will be no solace for teachers who face having their already meagre wages cut for taking industrial action in the face of skyrocketing inflation. Similarly, Mr Acting Speaker, as people struggle to heat their homes or keep the lights on this winter, they will not look the record of the DUP Economy Minister for any comfort, because they'll find no attempt to tackle the obscene profits of energy companies operating here, who are raking it in while people suffer. But despite all this calamity, Mr Speaker, people still have some hope. Just this morning, I spoke with housing executive maintenance workers, Acting Speaker, who have been on the picket line for 12 weeks now and have just announced a further 4-week strike action. The Economy Minister here voted against the trade union bill, which would have afforded those workers greater legal protection in this dispute, and many are worried about the effects being left in the lurch. They put themselves at risk during the pandemic, maintaining people's homes, and yet they're being offered an insulting 1.57% pay offer, and it's being described as a rise when in fact it's an actual cut. 1 in 3 of these workers are relying disgracefully on food banks, and many are paid just 6p above the minimum wage despite the vital work that they do. And ahead of this session, I met them this morning. They requested I personally ask Sinn Féin Community Minister to intervene in this dispute and ensure these workers get a proper pay rise. The money is there and they should be paid what they are worth, a lot more than what's currently being offered. I would make a similar appeal to the outgoing and any incoming Health Minister. We cannot endorse health workers getting a real terms pay cut. Health workers who are preparing for strike action in the near future, possibly weeks ahead. And there are more disputes to come. Royal Mail workers out on strike, BT, Openreach workers out on strike, council workers, not just for themselves, but for everybody who rely on their services and who deserve much, much better than what's being currently offered. Mr Acting Speaker, we must be clear that today's sitting is ultimately about the intransigence of the DUP, and I would urge them to stop playing with people's lives and get back in the government. However, make no mistake about it, we know a restored executive won't be the silver bullet that some may suggest. We know that previous executives refused to act in the face of a cost of living crisis, and their previous economic agenda did nothing to uplift our communities. So I have faith, frankly, in politicians not to deliver without a fight, but I have every faith in workers in our communities and in ordinary people's ability to keep up their pressure and deliver real change. So election or not, I'll be returning to picket lines in the coming days, because ultimately that's where real change in our society happens, on the streets, in communities, outside workplaces, and people taking action. Thank you.
Pat Sheehan.
Tá mé sásta bhfuil seansagam Lord an seo aniu agus ar dús, ba bhfuil am couple of focail ar áfhaoin na hamachtaí a tharla in Westminster inné. Lá cinúnach agus staráil a bhí an inné na rithú reachtaíach le haithint a safagiil a thuirt don Gaeilge sa stad seo. Inné blianta fada a món factais le carta agus cosintí faoin dlí a chintú don Gaeilge, is leis na gríomhaíochtaí pobl an lá seo, tusk gur béad san a bhain ach na Gaeilge amach. Hapar an rí-fartaíocht a gunne an comhananas agus na gearta. Agus chuirn an reachtaíocht seo leis an dá éineolacht agus leis an dá cultar agus is geall len í. Tásúil agam go dtí len túsa chuir le ré nua, nuair bheas mid anon ar gultar agsúla, cultúr atá ar cócéim lena chéile a chéileú, agus nuair bheas más agin ar na difriíochta idirín an éid bug is fiú a dhéanú dómh. Ag bogur rá, ba bhfuil am ará go bhfuil súil agam gur féidir len cion cóirla nua a capú aniu, agus inné sin céad ara, lás céad ara, agus na hairí ar fad eile. Aniu táid a lár garchéim ag námaíochta a leithead nar bhhair mór an daoine fríd ribh. Tá costas bí ag ardú go gasta lá inné lé. Tá ardú taigtha fásta ar rataí ús, agus tá sogin go bhfuil teanachar díreach ar rataí ús ar orgastí. Gan codú céilí codhúir daoine a ddíthe cónaithe in san am atá le teacht. Tá costas fuinneamh agus brosla ag ardú comáid, is cinse é go bhfuithí daoine bás a rí an gabhraí, mar gal ar an gantanas bia, nó gantanas teas, beidir mar gal ar an dárod. Agus leis an scéal a anú níos massa, tá an choras sláinte agus cuaram sóisialta faoi bhrú an mhór, tá sé ag tuite más a chéile. Is fear é go bhfuil daoine ag gol in é dúchas ag fannacht le cóir léis sa service sláinte. Ní féidir le conne a áil lena nachtarí fú, agus níl sé sin mai go leor. Taobh ma dinne a lig chun codú le daoine, go háirithe nuair atá an cineal gurcéim ón mar atá anois. Is sillir go bhfuil ar godú de dhíthar an phobal. Tá siad tin torseach ag éisteach le talú leiscéalta ón DUP faoin protocol. Tá siad ag géirí rialtas a bheith curtha ar bon go leithreach, tá sin tiltte acu. Tá dúilgas ag achan dana agus achan fartíí an seo a gol hon cin agus cion cuairla agus airí a capú aniu. Bíú sin mar atá, creidimid go bhfuil sé géist ag an DUP an phobal a aigeal gan cosint ó na tóirithe a Londain. Níl éon áras a go bhfuil siad ag garú poinós ar an phobal. Níl an rialtas a sasna gola cadú len an seo. Is é airí tófa aitiúla a bháin a bheith sásta talú airigid a corabócaí ibrithe agus teulaí, agus gréthaí baga a hacaíocht. Sé ina dtíthe aitiúla a bháin comáid a bheith sásta gol an lech leis de feibanna sa choras sláinte. Tá sin féin ré le golasteach san éimeanna saniu, agus tá Michelle O'Neill ré an post mar céad ara a ghlacu. Tá sé sillir go bhfuil dúthlan mór amach roiin a lig, mar sin ba bhfuil am ará leis an DUP. Oberlin, táiristeach san éimeannas linn chun síal ar níní a dheosú, agus an tionachar is masú den gurcéim gost costas marachtála a léadú. John an rud cart ar son an phobal. John an é sé. Gurmagad.
Gordon Lyons.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker. And let's be clear, this is not a serious attempt to elect a Speaker today. It's not even an attempt to have a debate about how we can best help those that are in need. It's not even a debate about how we can sort out the problems that's preventing political stability and the inability to form an executive. Rather, this is the campaign launch from the other parties opposite ahead of this election. This is nothing more than a stunt. Everyone here today knows that there will be no Speaker elected, that there will be no First and Deputy First Minister or other ministers appointed. And we know why, because devolution here in the Assembly and in the Executive can only take place whenever it is on a firm foundation. And that foundation has been shot to pieces by the Northern Ireland Protocol. It's disrupted Northern Ireland's place within the United Kingdom. It's created an economic barrier, and it's led to constitutional change without cross-community consent. We do not have political stability in Northern Ireland, and that is as a result of the Protocol. And to those that disagree, imagine just for a second if there were checks, control posts, charges and bureaucracy between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. Imagine if those were in place and nationalist ministers were forced to implement those changes. That would not be acceptable to anyone, and that would not be a firm foundation on which we can build political stability. And we have heard so much over the last number of months about the need to protect the Belfast Agreement, and that the Protocol is in some way a solution to that and that it protects it. Of course it doesn't. It blows it to pieces. And I think it's become apparent over the last number of days and weeks in particular that for many of the parties opposite, they only care about the Belfast Agreement when it suits them. Because we have the SDLP and Sinn Féin who are now calling for joint authority. And joint authority is clearly a breach of the Belfast Agreement. And we have the Alliance Party that are now wanting to exclude unionists from government here in Northern Ireland. And of course they're disagreeing, and of course they're rolling their eyes. Well, look, Naomi, I've got news for you. We're not going to sit down and shut up. We're going to be listened to. Because unionists have legitimate concerns. It will not be a point of order, Mr. Acting Speaker.
With all due respect, Mr. Acting Speaker, I'll take your advice on points of order, not the member sitting opposite. 2 points of order, Mr. Speaker, if I may. On the first point of order, is it in order for a member to directly address another member in this chamber as opposed to making their remarks through the chair? And on a second point of order, is it in order for a member to stand up in this chamber and completely and deliberately and maliciously misrepresent the position which has just been set out clearly by another member in an attempt to undermine their integrity?
Members, as I've indicated before, my responsibility is limited to overseeing the election of the Speaker. Points of order in relation to any other matters need to be referred to the Speaker. However, the previous Speaker has always indicated to members that they should use respect in this chamber and that remarks should be referred through the Speaker and not directly to members in the chamber.
Mr. Speaker, I'm more than happy to direct my remarks through you, so I'll say it again. We're not going to sit down and shut up, because we have legitimate concerns, and those concerns are going to be listened to. Because it has always been the case that devolution has worked best when we have that buy-in, when we have that consent from unionists, from nationals, and yes, from others as well. I acknowledge that. But that is when it has worked at best. I'll give way to Mr. Brett.
Thank the member for giving way, and I note when you were speaking there, the members on the Alliance Party rolling their eyes. But could you remind the House, Mr. Lyons, how many times the Alliance Party recalled this House when Sinn Féin brought it down for 3 years? Could you remind the House how many times Alliance tried to exclude Sinn Féin from government? Unionists will not sit down and be quiet, and we're going to have our say.
Well, I confirm to the member that not only did they not recall the Assembly, not only did they not call for the exclusion of Sinn Féin, when there was a recall debate, they didn't even turn up. So I think that shows you where their priorities lie. But we do best here when we're working together, when we have a firm foundation on which to build stable devolution, and we do not have that solid foundation right now. But I hope that we will. But that is where the barrier is coming from. But let me make one more point before I finish, and that is that there's a lot of cynicism in politics these days, and it's understandable why. But my party went into the last election on a very clear manifesto and very clear pledges. We said that we would not return to government here unless those issues with the protocol were dealt with, and dealt with once and for all. And, Mr Acting Speaker, I simply say this: we made a promise and we're going to keep it.
Matheson.
Thank you, Mr Acting Speaker. I rise to confirm my support for the nomination of a Speaker today. And in the context we find ourselves in here today, I would support either or indeed any nomination for a Speaker, which would bring us closer to seeing an executive formed and enable us to get on with the jobs we were elected to do. As a newly elected MLA, this is very far from the position I wanted to be in, making my first contribution in this place in what is nothing much more than a last chance saloon, staring at the potential collapse of these institutions. And they've been held to ransom by simply one party since May's election. But here we are, and we all sat in this chamber back in May, most of us ready to get to work on behalf of our constituents, but then observed the spectacle of the DUP members here refusing to elect a Speaker and preventing any business from taking place in this Assembly. And that refusal has left Northern Ireland utterly rudderless, without a budget, without the scrutiny of ministers or their departments, with unspent funds held in limbo, without any democratic accountability in Northern Ireland. And now even the caretaker ministers will be vacating their posts and leaving Northern Ireland under the direction of a Tory government in utter chaos. And we will be under the direction. I will not give way, as no other members seem to have given the courtesy to our party and our contributions. So I think we're going to be looking at unelected civil servants providing the only leadership in Northern Ireland in the coming weeks. And all this while we face a cost of living emergency and huge pressures on our public finances. And look, those challenges and pressures have been set out again and again since May. We have all received the emails from the doctors and nurses, from our business community. We have all met with our constituents, sadly, in our food banks and community centres, hearing about just how much pressure our communities are under at the moment. But it seems that for one party in this place, those messages are simply not getting through. Our health service is in crisis, our waiting lists are spiralling, and strategies to help deliver change on issues such as cancer services and mental health strategy, unfunded and gathering dust without an executive. We have hospital emergency departments unable to meet demand in the summer, let alone with the winter approaching. No executive pay policy set, leaving key workers in limbo over wage increases as inflation rise. Yes, I'll give way.
Would the member agree with me that it is utterly delusional of the DUP not to realise that their stunt is going to have a long-term impact on the 38,000 children who are languishing on waiting lists at present for healthcare and intervention?
Members, an extra minute.
Yes, I absolutely agree, and I think anybody who heard the contributions from the parent this morning couldn't fail to be affected by that crisis affecting paediatric waiting lists. It's another issue to be added to the list of pressures facing this place. And essentially we have departments with no budget, spending at risk to keep public services functioning. And we have a cost of living crisis, receiving essentially no local response from this place. We are left entirely at the mercy of a dysfunctional Tory government who seem to think that offering our people here a paltry £100 towards their oil bill is a sufficient intervention to help people here, while the DUP say that we just need Westminster, that's all that's required to deal with the crisis. And all this deadlock, this abject failure to provide stable government at a time of crisis is precipitated by one party's protest over the protocol about which this place can do nothing. We could keep this Assembly in suspension indefinitely, and not one line of the protocol would be altered. We all know, if we are being honest, that the only outcome that will resolve any of the issues with the protocol will arise from negotiations between the UK Government and the EU. We need to get on with our jobs. We're not here to renegotiate international treaties. We're here to govern the people of Northern Ireland and provide leadership, and we need to get on with that job. And there is anger and frustration in this chamber today, and quite right. We've heard the DUP refer earlier to their party being treated with contempt. In my view, it is the people of Northern Ireland who are being treated with contempt. Absolutely. We know that an executive being reformed is not a magic wand. It will not make our problems go away. But I, for one, got elected to try and do something, not to stand on the sidelines, wringing my hands and protesting over an issue that we can do nothing to change in this place. So I sincerely hope that we can do the right thing today. I don't believe that we will. I think that there's one party who is going to continue to stand in the way of progress, but we urgently need that faith restored in these institutions and in the democratic process in this place. Thank you.
Steve Aiken.
Much indeed, and thank you very much indeed, Mr. Acting Speaker, for controlling this rather unruly event, I think, as we go through. The people of Northern Ireland will be looking at this today, and many of them will be looking and saying, what are they doing? What is happening? Because here we are, squabbling back and forth. When we do have a crisis, we have a crisis in our healthcare system, we have a crisis for our welfare system, we have an energy crisis. All these things are impacting on us. And yet, we're squabbling and taking lumps out of each other. We have to ask ourselves, what are we really doing? We are supposed to be representing the people of Northern Ireland. We are supposed to be representing our constituents. Mike Nesbitt, back in 2016, when he asked me to come and stand to be an MLA, I did, because I wanted to make Northern Ireland a much better place. I wanted it a place where everybody could be working together for the good benefit of all of our people. Since that time, I think of the 6 years that we've been in and out of here, 4 of those years have been completely nugatory and pointless, because absolutely nothing's happened. We have had 3 years when the party opposite Sinn Féin held the place down. We have had COSON coming up, and we will be. How long, I do not know, that this Assembly will be down. Let's be honest. This might be the last time that any of us will be speaking in this Assembly. It will be a long time indeed before this Assembly comes back, I believe. There is a real issue with the protocol, and pretending time and time again that you could ignore unionist concerns about the protocol does not work. It has to be dealt with. And if we aren't complaining about it, who is standing up to try and make that happen? I do not say that because I believe in what the DUP is doing is right, but I can speak for all unionists who have real concerns about the protocol, and it must be sorted. And it will only be sorted when people start listening to the real concerns of the people of Northern Ireland that have that, not just unionists, but all people. We have to do that. To the Secretary of State, I find it absolutely incredulous that he's going out to spend about £6.5 million more of public money on an election, quite frankly, that people in Northern Ireland don't want. The thing I'm even more incredulous about, but I shouldn't be surprised, that bearing in mind his own government has wasted £35 billion in the last 3 or 4 weeks by complete ineptness. There is a lack of vision. There is a lack of understanding. But to hear people say that one of the solutions is likely to be some form of joint authority, I find that absolutely, again, incredible. And people trying to score points and raise the tensions right at this present moment in time does not work. The people of Northern Ireland are angry. You'll detect from my tone that I'm not exactly happy with what's happening here either, because we've got a job to do. And we should be doing that job. No, not at the moment. I think the real issues we have is to make sure we restore trust in the institutions and in democracy. We have to restore trust. We have to be back. So regardless of what happens and whether we do have an election or not, and if we do have an election when we come back here, can we not commit ourselves not to more and more polarisation, more and more whataboutery? Why can't we do something about trying to make Northern Ireland work and work effectively? Because that, Mr. Acting Speaker, is what we need to do. And just to finally say, that is the reason why I think Mike Nesbitt is the person to be the Speaker in this Assembly. I want to see him take his vision and move that for all of us to where we need to go. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I think I'm probably the only person who hasn't used my entire allocation. Maybe somebody else can make more sense of this place, because I can't anymore. Thank you.
Sinead McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr Acting Speaker. I got involved in politics for very simple reasons: to stand up for the city that I love and its people, to help bring jobs and investments to a place starved of both, to break down barriers for everybody on our island, especially women denied a voice for so long. I am sure that every single member of this Assembly had their own reasons. It might have been to improve our schools, get more people seen in our hospitals, tackle sectarianism, or to end divisions between our people. What I do believe, however, is that none of us got involved in politics to hold our society to ransom, or to force the vulnerable to pay the price of our political dysfunction by refusing to select a Speaker today. Yet that is the shameful situation in which we find ourselves today, because of this obscene boycott of power sharing. Because Jeffrey Donaldson, a man who will not even come here to sit in the seat to which he was elected, is too busy listening more to wee Jamie Bryson than the majority of the people in Northern Ireland. The truth is that one party refuses to accept the verdict of the electorate just 6 months ago. That is why the rest of us cannot elect a Speaker today to do our full jobs. Right now, yes, we can give out vouchers for food banks, but we can't tackle the reasons that people need to go to them. We can raise cases with the health trusts, but we can't bring down our waiting lists. We can ask questions to ministers, but we can't hold them accountable for their answers. No, an executive won't solve all our problems, but it has the power to set our priorities, and it is the very, very least that people should expect of us. I can't meet my responsibilities to my constituency without it, and neither can any of you. And when you ask people in Derry about the current paralysis, it's hard to adequately convey their frustration. They're angry that our politics isn't working, is forcing more of our young people to leave, and they're sick to the back teeth of the division that is holding us back. But they don't want pity. They just want representatives who will be on their side, who will speak up to their needs, who will work with each other and for each other, and to get something done, to bring the jobs, the opportunity that is owed to our city. They want to introduce childcare that doesn't cost the earth, but gives their children the best start in life. They want to fund services like Northlands that can finally deal with addiction and the crisis that is plaguing our people, to finally deliver a university of size that was promised. That's the very least that the people of Derry deserve, and it makes me furious that it has been denied. Next week, we may be well asking for votes again, asking for people to put us in a job when those who should be helping to make this place work aren't doing theirs. To the DUP, I ask you to reflect carefully on your election pitch, on those doors in the weeks ahead, before you vote on whether to select a Speaker today. Will you be telling people, freezing pensioners, that you will continue to do nothing to heat their homes? Will you tell people who can't make ends meet in their jobs that you will continue to boycott yours? Will it be to tell people languishing on waiting lists that you will continue to let their waits get longer? Mr Speaker, next year we will be celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement. It wasn't then, and it isn't now, a document that guaranteed peace on this island. But it was a commitment to future generations that a different way forward was possible and it was achievable, that we could leave the painful memories of the past behind and look forward to a future. But it is only ever going to be possible if we put the hard yards in to make peace work, because this place only works
when you work for it. At this moment of crisis, we should be fulfilling that commitment by coming together to show the people of the North, and there is a reason across our histories and division to work together, and that can make their lives better. Mr Acting Speaker, that is why I'm in politics, and that is why the SDLP will continue to work for and to fight for, because this place is worth fighting for. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Claire Sugden.
Thank you, Mr Acting Speaker. I rise to support the election of the Speaker. I have no difficulty whatsoever supporting Patsy McGlone or indeed Mike Ness, but I think equally both would do a great job. If anything, I would probably lean more towards Patsy McGlone, because I think, given his service, given his sense of community, I think that's exactly what this Assembly needs. I understand the issue, but I really don't understand the approach. I will say that from the outset of the protocol, I was quite prepared to see the opportunities that came with that. But as it stands, I cannot support the protocol, because within days, weeks of the protocol coming into effect, I can say wholeheartedly and genuinely that I was contacted by farms, by businesses, by people that are going to be affected by the protocol. And I do know that the protocol is giving benefit to some businesses, but it tends to be large businesses. And we have to remember that in Northern Ireland, we're a small, medium enterprise economy. The issues that are most being affected by the protocol are coming from those businesses. If we pull the rug from beneath those, we're pulling the rug from beneath our entire economy. I was speaking to the Ulster Farmers Union last week, and they outlined the issues that the protocol is continuing to have. Mr Acting Speaker, it does disappoint me that this has become a unionist and nationalist issue, because I can assure you my issues with the protocol are not constitutional. My issues are trade issues and the issues that are affecting my constituents. It saddens me that people are no longer coming forward because they see this as a green and orange issue. We can't truly have the debate on this issue unless we outline the issues, and certainly I would appeal to all in this House to listen. Stop talking and listen. It needs to be fixed. It can be fixed, and I truly believe it will be fixed. Indeed, in recent weeks, the Northern Ireland Office of the Secretary of State, the Minister of State, has talked about the momentum that is building around talks, and I look forward to that, which is why it is disappointing that the Secretary of State saw fit to implement the law. What I would also say to the Secretary of State, he will have to change the law next week, because we're coming to a cliff edge at 1 minute past midnight tomorrow, when ministers will vacate their offices. And normally during a period of purdah, we would have caretaking ministers in place to enact those decisions that matter, that enable the departments to work on a day-to-day basis. We don't have that from tomorrow. So the Secretary of State will have to legislate. So I think there is hypocrisy in something that they themselves had set a precedent on before. I think fixing the protocol, however, doesn't need to happen in the absence of an Assembly. And I would genuinely appeal to the Democratic Unionist Party to demonstrate that you do care about the issues, and I know you do, because your constituents submit questions as much as I do. And do what you did in January 2023 when you withdrew your First Minister, but allowed this Assembly to function. Demonstrate that you are willing to work towards actually fixing the issues that we are capable and responsible for fixing. And maybe that is an olive branch to the Secretary of State to maybe take some action and recognise that you will work if you're given the chance. To those who say that this Assembly and this Executive is not capable of anything, yes, we are. This day week I spoke at a cost of living crisis event, and I can wholeheartedly say to you that every week in my office a constituent cries to me because they can't get a house, they can't put food on their table, and they can't heat their homes. We are only going to see the worst of that. And what can we do? It's more than money. We could insulate homes. We could give free school meals to every family in Northern Ireland to take that pressure off. We could defer rates. There is so much that this Assembly could do. So please don't tell people on the doorsteps in the next number of weeks that we can do nothing. Because if you are going to say that, then what's this place about? It's certainly not about the issues that you say. This morning, I attended a community transport meeting. Community transport, who takes our elderly out of our homes where our public services failed. And certainly I would even appeal to the Minister for Infrastructure in his next few hours if he could look at trying to fund that, because community transport is picking up the pieces of the community ambulance service. The ambulance service who can't even take people to hospital and they're waiting hours outside of it. Those are the issues that matter to people, and those are the issues that I hope the electorate will ask you about on the doorsteps. So please do what you can. There's not much time left, but I would appeal to anyone to take responsibility for the power you hold. If those are my last words as an MLA, they will echo the first words I had in my maiden speech. Thank you.
Dodds.
Mr Acting Speaker, it is abundantly clear that today's debate will do nothing to fix the political situation that we find ourselves in. There is scant acknowledgement for the concerns of unionism in relation to the protocol and little regard for facts on the increasing costs of living and this Assembly's ability to deal with it. So at the outset of my remarks, let me be clear. I want to see devolution restored. I believe that a stable, prosperous Northern Ireland with a properly functioning executive and assembly is good for all of us. And everyone feels the cost of living pressures. I dare say everyone in this chamber cares deeply about our health service, our schools and our economy. But we must be real about this Assembly's ability to deal with it. Just recently, the Finance Minister told us that the potential overspend in the Northern Ireland budget was £660 million. And in a response to a question that I received an answer from the Education Minister this morning, she indicates that there is a resource pressure in education of £530 million. And this includes funding for children with special educational needs, school holiday food payments, increased energy costs and the Engage programme. It is time to be honest and straight-talking about what this place can or cannot do about some of these issues.
Point of order.
It is.
On a point of order, Mr Acting Speaker, is it in order, can you advise for members who don't want this Assembly to sit and don't want ministers to take office to list pressures on public services for ministerial answers, which there is no way of being dealt with because they refuse to allow this place to sit? Is that in order?
The member has made his point, as I've said, and will repeat, hopefully not too many more times in this chamber today. The purpose of this meeting, for me, is the election of a Speaker and Deputy Speakers.
It's always amazing, Mr Acting Speaker, that when people don't want to acknowledge or hear the truth, they get bogus points of order that are there. Absolutely shameful. It is clear that the finances required to deal with the cost of living crisis will come from our national government in Westminster, and it is there that we are working and taking our seats to make sure that there is funding for energy payments for families in Northern Ireland. Meanwhile, the protocol is costing consumers and businesses every day. In the first 6 months of this year, the Traders Support Scheme, designed to support businesses with the bureaucracy and paperwork of the protocol, has cost the taxpayer £63 million. That's £2.6 million every week with the bureaucracy of the protocol. The protocol means that Northern Ireland citizens cannot benefit from UK-wide tax changes since we are tied to EU VAT rules. Mr Acting Speaker, we have to face the fact that it's difficult to fix our health service when the Health Minister says that the protocol is putting our supply of medicine at risk and adds additional cost to those medicines. It's difficult to build new schools and hospitals when the protocol adds 25% to the cost of steel, when that steel comes from our own UK internal market. And it's difficult to help with the cost of living when the protocol adds 30% to transport costs for household goods. Most profoundly of all, the protocol has caused a crisis for our political institutions. The Northern Ireland Protocol has subjugated Article 6 of the Act of Union and has trashed democratic norms in this part of the United Kingdom. The principle of consent as conceived by the Belfast Agreement has been ignored. For some in this chamber today, it's like a pick and mix. Take it when you want it, but ignore it when you don't. Unionism does not consent to the protocol. We will not be bullied, and our mandate will not be ignored. And in any election, we will take our case to the people and renew our mandate of opposition to the protocol. So in finishing, Mr. Acting Speaker, there is a very clear message to the Secretary of State, the Minister of State, and indeed the European Union. And that message is, get on with it. The Government published its command paper on the protocol in July 2021. It has had almost 18 months to resolve the issue. The Secretary of State needs to apply some urgency to the matter.
Would the member give way?
Yes, of course.
I thank the member for giving way. I hear some laughter across the House, but would the member agree with me that when the DUP went back into government in 2020, on the condition in New Decade, New Approach that Northern Ireland's place would be fully restored as an integral part of this United Kingdom, and we in government sought to negotiate the worst parts of the protocol, that instead of support around this House, we were undermined by every single other party facing us here, signing up not to help get those changes, but to rigorous implementation, undermining those negotiations at a critical time, not just for a week, not just for a month,
intervention,
but for 2 full
not
years.
a statement.
Can I thank my colleague for her intervention? And of course, we all know that the rigorous implementers went off down to Dublin in the middle of a COVID crisis to ensure that the protocol would be implemented. So, Mr. Speaker, if I can return to my point, the Government published its command paper on the protocol in July.
To close, please.
I'll finish shortly. 2021. It has had 18 months to resolve the issue. It is time to deal with a protocol that disrupts the United Kingdom's internal market, that leaves this part of the United Kingdom subject to the laws of a foreign political entity and subjugates the Act of Union.
Danny Donnelly.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker. Until this year, my main job was as a nurse working in the Ulster Hospital. Like many first-time MLAs, I left my career to come and work here. But since the election 6 months ago, I've been prevented from doing what I was sent here to do. I haven't been able to take part in debates on important issues in this chamber or attend committee meetings to scrutinise the work of our ministers or departments. No one has. Over the last 6 months, however, I have met with many people and groups who have strongly expressed their wish that this Assembly is up and delivering for everyone in Northern Ireland as soon as possible. Members from most parties attended the Crushed by the Cost of Living event a few weeks ago in this building, organised by Dr Ciara Fitzpatrick, which highlighted the huge strain that the increases in the cost of living are put on many households and families across Northern Ireland. The speakers made a desperate plea for urgent action to be taken to help to support people struggling to heat their homes and feed their families at this time. One of the speakers, consultant paediatrician Dr Julianne Maney, told us that she was very concerned about what this winter would bring for those being hardest hit. One of the risk factors for sudden unexpected death in infancy is hypothermia. Paediatricians are very concerned about fuel poverty and that infants will be cold, as many people will struggle to heat their homes. They are very concerned that infants might die this winter of sudden unexpected death due to hypothermia. In my opinion, this should be reason enough to reform the executive. Our local food bank in Larne has seen requests for assistance increase by 111% since this time last year, and they're seeing more requests from families with children. Some people have even been requesting emergency food handouts that can be eaten cold because they can't afford the energy to cook it. We had a presentation here a couple of weeks ago from some community groups who provide support to people with learning disabilities and mental health conditions to get them into and to continue in employment. They rely on the European Social Fund, and this is due to end early next year, with no other funding identified to replace it. Without urgent intervention, many of these vital services will cease to exist for 17,000 people who rely on them, and the potential loss of 1,700 jobs from the workers who support them.
Would the member give way?
Yes.
Would the member agree with me that it is all the more serious given the pressures on public finances and the fact that many of those community and voluntary organisations are doing jobs that would otherwise have to be done by departments who can't afford to do it?
There's an extra minute.
Absolutely, I would completely agree with that, and they add a huge value to the amount of work that is done here in Northern Ireland. As was highlighted at this event a couple of weeks ago for these organisations, time is running out, and even more so now. I've also heard from many groups representing people suffering from medical conditions that need action plans to be progressed to improve treatment for people here in Northern Ireland. There's a group of cancer patients who can't get scans that are available in GB because of the lack of a multi-year budget to fund the implementation of the cancer strategy. It would appear that there is now a healthcare border in the Irish Sea. Last week, along with other local MLAs, I met representatives and charities of over 100 businesses in Larne that were struggling with the increased energy bills and other pressures, some so much that they fear they may not be able to keep going for much longer. They were very clear that we should do all we can to reform the Assembly to support them through this crisis. People are spending years suffering on waiting lists, while their eyesight or mobility deteriorates, waiting on routine operations, sometimes in constant pain. Ambulances are stacked up outside our hospitals, unable to offload sick patients, because there are no spaces in A&E departments and no beds available in the wider hospital. Our health service is operating under extreme pressure, and we aren't even in the winter months yet. Mr. Acting Speaker, we are in a crisis. People are unable to meet their needs and provide for their families. Otherwise, solid businesses are going to the wall. Our health service is facing many serious challenges. Things are getting harder and harder for many of the people we represent, and we are failing them. Whatever issues that parties have, they should be able to come here and work with other elected members to do what we can to support people in hardship. Jeffrey Donaldson, leader of the DUP, said in 2019, "It is wrong to blackmail an entire community and say that you cannot have a government until we get our way." Yet here we are. Mr. Acting Speaker, it is wrong that we have a system that allows people in Northern Ireland to be used as leverage in a political dispute. I got involved in politics to try to make this place better for everyone. It's going the other way. As I said earlier, my background is in nursing, and I'd like to share this observation. If one nurse refuses to be involved in the care of a sick patient, that nurse's professionalism and ability to do the job would very quickly be called into question. They would face stiff restrictions on their practice and could ultimately be sacked and struck off for not doing their job. If that nurse were to prevent other nurses from attending the patient, the consequences could be even more severe. Thankfully, most nurses would consider it unimaginable that a nurse would refuse to help a sick patient. In closing, we need to help people in need. We need to end ransom politics. We need a reform system that can be relied on to deliver for people, whatever the political situation is, and we need to be able to work together for the common good. I support this motion. Thank you.
David Brooks.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker. I understand this is not considered a maiden speech in terms of convention, but it's nevertheless an honour to stand for the first time in the chamber and speak as one of the DUP members for East Belfast. I can tell you, when I went on the doorsteps in April and May, I spent considerable time talking with constituents about the matters that mattered most to them and their families. No one in this place is naive or ambivalent towards the pressures that are being faced by families. All of us in our offices will work day and daily with constituents needing help and assistance, and will do what we can to help them. For the last 6 months, the DUP ensured that ministers remained in place and money continued to be drawn down by departments, and vital support was provided through the UK Government's cost of living package. And there needs to be some honesty in this place and some realism. While not without its merits, this place is no substitute for the kind of support that can be provided through the financial firepower of our national government at Westminster. In the months since the election, there has been a dishonesty in public discourse emanating from some parties. They have actively cultivated and promoted, for cynical political purposes, a myth that there is hundreds of millions of pounds just sitting on the hill waiting to be handed out by a new executive. We all know now that that despite the Sinn Féin Finance Minister giving the impression his coffers were bountiful with cash that he can't wait to give away if only the DUP would let him, the Executive is hugely over budget. Sinn Féin and a number of other parties in this chamber have regrettably played cheap politics with the cost of living crisis, raising false hopes and expectations. No, thank you. We know our party wants to see the institutions restored in full. We have operated them for 15 years, and our commitment to devolution is not in question. That is only viable, however, with the confidence of both, not just one community. It remains that not one unionist in this place. It remains that not one unionist in this place supports the protocol. Just as before the last election, not one. Those I talked to on the doorsteps were clear on our stance on the protocol when they went to the polls. They knew that Jeffrey Donaldson had been as reasonable as possible, giving all the time and space that he could to allow the government to negotiate a solution or to bring forward action of their own to restore Northern Ireland's place fully within the UK internal market. Since that time on the ground, I have heard no message more loudly from the unionist community in East Belfast than simply this: stand your ground. It is not only that they understand that the protocol is costing Northern Ireland hundreds of millions of pounds each year, or the grace periods mask the full scale of harm the protocol brings with it. In my experience across the unionist spectrum, people across the unionist spectrum have had enough of the foundational tenets of the Good Friday Agreement. Many here are happy to extol when convenient to themselves, being considered sacred when they provide political advantage or protection to nationalism, then being discarded when inconvenient or providing similar safeguards to unionism. Unionists want the pitch levelled. They want fairness restored. The double standards and the double standards, the attitude of safeguards for me but not for thee, are corrosive to trust in our institutions. Earlier this week, we watched as the SDLP was emphasising the need for assembly consent in order to block the provisions of the protocol bill, while also wanting to override and bin the need for Irish language standards to be approved jointly by the First and Deputy First Ministers. The hypocrisy of these contrasting positions is obvious and shamelessly all too regular. Nobody in this chamber today believes this charade debate will change anything. Sinn Féin and the Alliance Party are staging this stunt as a kickstart to their campaigns in a snap election. Their grandstanding here will change nothing. I simply and genuinely say to those who continue to dismiss the grave concerns of unionists on the protocol and who demand business as usual, you gravely underestimate the resilience and the determination of unionists of many hues on this issue, and your unwillingness to hear them corrodes confidence in our political system and institutions. Power sharing requires the confidence of both communities. I was elected on a mandate seeking tangible action on the protocol and restoring our place in the UK internal market. I have sought to honour that mandate and the commitments that I have made to my electors. Just as the Secretary of State says he is bound by the legislation and will do what is required of him, I am bound by commitments made I give to those who give me my mandate, and I will continue to do what is required of me. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mark Durkin.
I welcome the opportunity to speak today to represent not only the views of the SDLP, but more importantly to relay the pleas and recount the desperation facing so many of my constituents in Derry and households right across the north. It is shameful that at a time of such acute need we have been prevented from doing our jobs, effecting positive change for people, sheltering people from the worst that this winter will bring. It is an indelible stain, even on the dubious record of the DUP, that when people need an executive more than ever, that their siege of Stormont continues, and it is starving people. It is frustrating that as members we stand here today regurgitating, yes, similar pleas, demanding an end to yet another painful purgatory that achieves nothing, but if ended could change a lot. People are anxious, people are angry, and justifiably so. That anxiety and anger is palpable in every parent struggling to feed their children, in every patient waiting for care, in every family worrying about how they will keep a roof over their families' heads. The impact on the well-being of our people is starkly evident. We have a much-needed mental health strategy that is largely unfunded. Our communities are still reeling from the pandemic, hit by a cost-of-living crisis, while caretaker ministers have largely sat on their hands and done barely the minimum. That I am convinced of. When the unprecedented challenges of the last few years unfolded on our shores, certainly.
Do you not think the member is being rather disingenuous saying that, when the reality was, without an executive, without a budget, the powers of caretaker ministers were just that, caretaker ministers. And what we need is an executive.
Members, another minute.
I thank the member for the intervention. There are many ministers who have refused, in my opinion, to take action that they were able to take, even in the absence of an executive, that would ameliorate the suffering that people here are going through. When the unprecedented challenges of the last few years unfolded on our shores, there was a collective will across society to step up to the plate. How would our shared home place have coped if the likes of our heroic health force, our teachers, our postal workers, the housing sector and so many more public servants refused to do their jobs, if they brought our society to a standstill? The difference is that if and when these beleaguered, shamefully undervalued workers aren't paid when they have no alternative but to strike. The DUP do have an alternative. That said, I in no way want to undermine the work that is ongoing in constituency offices, which are busier now than ever before. The demands on office staff and across the advice sector at this time are evidence of the huge need out there and highlight just how desperate people are. Every day we hear that things have never been so bad, a sentiment echoed right across every sector, from healthcare to housing, from education to the economy. Services and their workforces are stretched beyond their limits, an elasticity that is waning and a spirit that is set to snap. Ultimately, my job, and the job of all of us, is to change policy and legislate to reduce the numbers of constituents seeking our help, to create a fair and effective society that works for everyone. That's why I do this job. I know many members across the chamber are hearing similar or the same problems, and presumably they once shared our desire to make things better. Is that not why we all got into politics in the first place? So I would ask the DUP, how does it feel to be wilfully making things worse? To be making life harder, not only for the poor, not only for children, not only for the vulnerable, not only for nationalists, not only for others, not only those who do not share their vision on a Brexit they vociferously campaigned for, and on a protocol that they now rail and rally against, but they are making life more difficult for everyone. I don't know how they sleep at night. The hypocrisy of the DUP is a bitter pill to swallow. When Sinn Féin brought these institutions down for 3 years in 2017, DUP representatives told us then, and have repeated during the last session and again today, how futile and how costly that was, how irresponsible it was. The blockade of our institutions by one party is not democratic. They aren't my words, they're Sir Geoffrey Donaldson's. It begs the question, what's different now? The one and only thing that is different now is that things are even worse. The last thing people need, Acting Speaker, is another election which will cost millions and change nothing. I implore those across the chamber, for the future of public services and for the welfare of our people, do the right thing, end this chaos, allow us to get on with the work that people put us here to do.
Peter McReynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker, and I rise with a mixture of pride and anger to speak in support of nominating a Speaker today. Unfortunately, over the last 6 months, I've spent more time in this chamber with primary and secondary schools than I have with MLAs. I haven't been able to discuss legislation, I haven't been able to scrutinise ministers, and I certainly haven't been able to raise issues on behalf of my constituents on this Assembly floor. Like many here, I was a local councillor for 5 years before becoming an MLA, and I was proud to stand for election for the Alliance Party in East Belfast just 6 months ago. I built up a solid reputation as someone who just got on with things and delivered for his constituents, doing the job I was elected to do. No drama, no rhetoric, no time wasting. So it is unthinkable and unconscionable that we are here today during a cost of living crisis, a climate emergency, after a 2-year global pandemic, facing a winter that many will struggle to get through, looking at an indulgent election to the tune of £6.5 million at a time when many people and families across Northern Ireland are suffering because they're facing the choice of heating their home or skipping a meal. Mr. Acting Speaker, a food bank in my constituency told me recently how someone arrived at their door desperate for food. They were brought to tears when offered chilled foods in the package they were provided with, and brought to tears because they were ashamed to admit that they couldn't afford the electricity to turn their fridge on at home. Children in the most deprived areas of Northern Ireland are 6 times more likely to be placed on a child protection register and 4 times more likely to be taken into care. As one food bank user wrote on their social media recently, we are a family that is just surviving, not living. What kind of society are we allowing to exist outside these walls in 2022? Food banks shouldn't have to exist, we know that. But it's especially hard for me to stomach when some politicians sit on their hands while it's the volunteers who shoulder the wheel to help the most vulnerable in our society. At the same time as all this, I see and hear how the people of Northern Ireland are being used as so-called leverage, and I've heard that screamed across this chamber today already, misinformed by a party in this chamber who profess to care about Northern Ireland, them and their lives. No one can tell me who the collapse of this Assembly is benefiting, that it is a constructive negotiating tactic in talks between the UK and the EU, or that it is benefiting the communities across Northern Ireland that put us here. They didn't elect us to go to lunches and launches in this place. We were elected to legislate and improve the lives of everyone in Northern Ireland through the formation of this Assembly and an executive. Not just those that voted for us, not just those that agree with us, but everyone. To turn up for them each and every single day, listen to the key workers that we all used to clap for during the pandemic, and make the realities that they are seeing every day easier. Stories like what we heard from Dr. Julianne Maney, who spoke of having to treat children, patch them up, and send them back to the environment that made them ill in the first place. Or from Andy McClenaghan, who broke down as he spoke about what he is seeing and hearing from social workers in his organisation. Those conversations took place in the long gallery upstairs. This chamber was silent and empty. Mr. Acting Speaker, Stormont can't fix everything that's wrong in the world today. It can't address all the issues that we've been hearing about, but it can at least show that we care about the people who elect us and make the necessary changes to improve their lives. That starts today with getting this Assembly and Executive functioning as it should. I support the election of a Speaker today, I support devolution, and I support MLAs carrying out the roles that they were elected to do. So I plead with the DUP. I plead with my former DUP councillors on Belfast City Council. For the sake of the people of Northern Ireland, nominate a Speaker, get this place up and running again, and get back to work.
Justin McNulty.
In contemplating my contribution as an SDLP MLA, I reflected on a Native American proverb which proclaims, "We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children." I'm very lucky to have 3 bright and brilliant young men from my old school, the Abbey in Newry, shadowing me on work experience in this week. Oisin Hart, Andrew McGuinness and Josh Turley. Sophie Keane from the Sacred Heart was with me last week. 4 people who give me a tremendous sense of hope for the future. Oisin, Andrew and Josh are sitting in the gallery today, and I promise them that I will use my time in this chamber to voice their views, to advance their hopes and share their fears. I asked them what needed to be said, and this is what they told me. Members of this Assembly have a responsibility to represent and deliver. The people you serve are not leverage and should not be used as political pawns in a chess game where everyone loses. Regardless of whether you back Brexit or not, it's now time to back your people, not weaken the democracy we depend on. Holding this chamber and our executive to ransom is holding the people to ransom. Holding families and businesses to ransom, struggling with a cost of living and a cost of doing business that's out of control. Holding our young people to ransom. Holding people languishing on health waiting lists to ransom. Holding those waiting for a home to ransom. Holding children with special educational needs to ransom. Holding workers waiting for fair pay to ransom. Holding us all to ransom. The DUP attacked Sinn Féin for abstentious MPs, even though the DUP have abstentious ministers. Sinn Féin attacked the DUP for collapsing the executive in 2021, even though Sinn Féin did the same for 3 years in 2017. It's so disheartening for everyone to be sidelined by their deadlock. The question is, what are you going to do now? If MLAs are serious about making this place work, then they should get back to work. Finding a solution to the protocol will be made so much easier if parties in this chamber sat down together, reached an agreement and fought for a solution together from a position of power in an executive. You cannot fix your past by sacrificing our future. We want job prospects and we want climate action. We want shelter for the homeless and food for the hungry. We want justice and fairness for the downtrodden and the marginalised. We want our parents and our grandparents looked after when they're sick. We want to view our futures with confidence, with ambition and with excitement. From their lips to God's ears, Ceann Comhairle. Through a combination of frustration and despair, so many of our young people opt to build their lives somewhere other than here. That is a very poor reflection on both the ambition and the competence of these institutions. This latest needless crisis must be resolved before the damage becomes irreversible. Ceann Comhairle, I have spoken here before about the old Irish tradition of meitheal, where men and women of all creeds work in unity to win the harvest. Through hard toil, mutual respect and honest endeavour, communities across this land would safeguard one another by spilling their sweat with each other and for each other. My God, how even a fraction of that ethos would make a world of difference in this place. Is it too much to ask for us to come together to spill our sweat for the people we serve? The 3 young men watching you in the chamber today have spoken very clearly. They want our shared home place to work, to thrive and to prosper. They want to look to the future with hope and with confidence and with excitement. They want you to do your duty and get back to work. So, just do it. I started with a proverb, and I'll finish with one. Or scath the Céile or Irene Nadini. People live in each other's shadows, or we rely on each other for shelter from the storm. Cora Mila Mayowit, Ceann Comhairle.
David Honeyford.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker. I don't think an election will hasten the day that the protocol is sorted out, but that is a matter for the government. The local parties are not at the table to negotiate. Those are some of Jeffrey Donaldson's words yesterday, and we all agree with you, Jeffrey. We also all agree that your continued strike will not hasten the day that the protocol is sorted out either. That's a matter for the UK Government and the EU to resolve, and both have agreed to resolve the issue.
but from the DUP walked out last February, we have seen the steady decline in mounting circumstances that ordinary people now are living through. A grown-up party of government doesn't behave like this. It's been said about let's get real, so let's get real. I want to tell you about a family in Lagan Valley that I dealt with recently. A typical hard-working family, like many that are in all of our constituencies. So this is Paul and Esther's story from Lisburn. Paul works full-time. He earns 24 grand a year, and Esther works part-time due to the cost of childcare. So she works her hours around her 2 children. They both work hard, and their world are their 2 kids and their home they purchased several years ago. They're a young family with young children, and have their whole future ahead of them. Yet, Paul and Esther are really struggling. Really struggling. During COVID, they had no choice but to take a holiday on their mortgage due to furlough, and they are now paying that back. Paul drives in his job and has seen his fuel costs massively increase. And like many families, they now have a huge increase in their mortgage monthly payment. They are struggling to pay their bills, to heat their homes, to feed their kids. Here they were calling for help, in tears, embarrassed and broken. They were at their wits' end. They aren't entitled to a payment of universal credit. And okay, they'll get the £500 or the £400 sometime when they're electric, and they'll get the pitiful £100 of oil payment. But that's such little support at a time when they need it most. This House should be providing tailored help for our people. That is why we are elected. Paul doesn't even know how he'll get to work in the next few weeks. Does he pay his mortgage? Does he put petrol in his car? Does he heat his home, or does he feed his family? These are the real choices that people are having to make here in Northern Ireland. And this is 2022. I often visit the local food bank in Lisburn, and food banks have been mentioned by other members already. But in Lisburn, I was informed recently that there was over 100% increase in this month of October alone and to date. The highest increase was from low-income working families. Those are hard-working people. They got through COVID, and now they've been broken by this crisis. With this Assembly not functioning or being able to offer help or give direction or stability, it's working people like Paul and Esther that you are hurting. They are the people caught up in your political games. In Lagan Valley, I met with the local PSNI. We were chatting about crime rates in the area, and I was shocked at the PSNI stat, and one that I still can't get over. Again, I repeat, this is 2022. In Lisburn, stealing food to survive from supermarkets and shops is up 53%. This has become the highest crime in the area. It's time to end ransom politics, where the rest of us sit here parlously to get financial support to the very people that need it most. No one should be left behind, because these are our neighbours, they're our friends, and they're our families. Shamelessly, DUP members have sat today nodding and laughing at times along, but the elephant in the room, and the elephant in the room that I suspect, the majority of you don't even agree with the decision your leadership has inflicted on our people. How could you? It's disgusting at a time like this. It's shameless at a time like this. It's embarrassing. Please think of your constituents and our constituents and everyone's constituents. Call your strike off, get on with your job, do the job you're paid for, and let's get this place working. Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker.
Thank you, members. I have no further names on the speaking list. Therefore, the question is that Mr. Patsy McGlone be Speaker of this Assembly. All those in favour say aye. Aye. And contrary, no. No. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those who are contrary say no. No. Okay. Okay. Yep. Clear the lobbies. The question will be put in 3 minutes. Order, members. Order. Order, members. Resume your seats. The question is that Mr Patsy McGlone be Speaker of the Assembly. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, if any, no. It is, members, it is clear that the decision has been challenged. Therefore, I am calling for tellers. Do we have tellers? Order, members. Tellers have been appointed as follows. Tellers for the Ayes, Sinead McLaughlin and Mark Durkin. Tellers for the Noes, Deborah Erskine and Diane Forsyth. Clear the lobbies. The Assembly will divide. Ayes to my right and Noes to my left. Order. Members resume their seats, please. Order. Members resume their seats. The clerk will read the result.
69 members voted, of which 45 voted aye, 65.2%. 27 nationalists voted, of which 27 voted aye, 100%. 25 unionists voted, of which 1 voted aye, 4%. 17 others voted, of which 17 voted aye, 100%. The motion is negatived.
The motion falls. Unfasten the doors, please. The question has not been agreed, and therefore the question will now be put in relation to the second candidate. I've been advised by party whips in accordance with Standing Order 27(1)(a)(b) that there is an agreement that we can dispense with the 3 minutes and move straight to the division. The question is that Mr Mike Nesbitt be Speaker of this Assembly. All of those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. No. Aye. Members, as the whips have agreed to dispense with the 3 minutes, I now call for tellers. Do we have tellers? Order. Members, tellers have been appointed as follows. Tellers for the Ayes, Steve Aiken and Robbie Butler. Tellers for the Noes, Deborah Erskine and Diane Forsyth. Clear the lobbies. The Assembly will divide. Ayes to my right and Noes to my left.
Secure the doors, please. Members resume their seats, please. Order.
Okay.
Clerk, read the result.
48 members voted, of which 24 voted aye, 50%. No nationalists voted. 31 unionists voted, of which 7 voted aye, 22.6%. 17 others voted, of which 17 voted aye, 100%. 6 members who voted in both lobbies are not included in these results. The motion is negatived.
Unfasten the doors. The motion has failed. The Assembly has today been unable to elect a Speaker and been unable to conduct its first item of business. Therefore, we can proceed no further. Any further sitting of the Assembly can only be held to elect a Speaker and Deputy Speakers. Under Section 39(2) of the Northern Ireland Act 1998, the current Speaker remains in office until a successor is elected. I therefore propose, by leave of the Assembly, to adjourn the sitting until a future date, the details of which will be communicated to members in due course. The question is that the Assembly do now adjourn. The Assembly is adjourned.